Adul momolo kontie adul achiel to twala meru banga ikome no chweo. Ametie I Paris memero. Dodi eti Uganda. Iya adul momolo konkan. Jama bedi ye tie jopur. Ipuro cham amo chamo. Kede cham amo chato.
In 2014, the World Bank approved funding for a roads project in northeastern Uganda. The project is intended to benefit over 2.25 million people. As this is an international passageway, it will also boost national economy.
Aso kamedo joma dulo tiko winyo kedebe project tie bino. Jo ko bedo keda yo maich. Pien jo kelo project ni odo tiko yamne jobe yaro mino jo tiche. Chiko it jodi wacho ne jobe jo yaro udo seta ame tot ame loko kuogi. So joma dulo kodong tiche keda yo maich. Pi winyo kopamako project ni.
The World Bank is an MDB, a multilateral development bank with a mission to end extreme poverty while promoting shared prosperity on a livable planet.
Multilateral development banks are banks that look at the developmental agenda, the global developmental agenda from a public service perspective.
Since 1947, the World Bank has funded over 12,000 development projects. Bank-funded projects provide clean water, access to affordable power, roads and transportation, education and healthcare. Despite tremendous successes, there is a long and complicated history and public debate about the unintended or unheeded consequences of large development projects.
Much of where we do development is where development hasn't happened yet, which means it's in rural and forested areas or areas that are disconnected from the modern economy.
And the risk that things can go wrong is significant, not necessarily because anyone's behaving badly, but because of the complexity of the projects, the lack of certainty about what the environment is.
You know, these are institutions that are dealing in the billions, if not trillions of dollars, and are coming into communities where the power dynamic between an MDB and government versus, you know, a small farmer or fisherman, the power imbalance is so enormous.
People have been impoverished due to projects. People have been displaced by projects, which totally conflicts with what was the project meant to be.
Ka wano kero kede translator wa ngata wuro loko ne wako okoriame chienge me owuro wano tie kede winyere pichul. Ka wando konya kede begini rach. Okodonyo yamo ne waleba me mo mine waluoro. Yama recho me kelo luoro ikom dano. Jogi obino diko puro yen me jo paka me udo gini yambe limaro diko puro magode de piny. Ka me tie pur kede idinene ka tesin, irere ta tesin ame udo liame ochulo. So gino leo ko bedo gi aber but anena ber but jame ogodo ti affected.
If you're doing an infrastructure project, so you're building a road, you know, between two cities, or you're building a dam, or you're opening a new mining area, it can't not have big impacts because it's just such a big project.
But a lot of the social consequences that happen as a result are not inevitable. And they often happen just due to negligence and, you know, a lack of will and a lack of sort of political capital to address them.
My instinct is that the human mind is not capable of fully understanding all the impacts. And so the chances that you've missed something and there's some unintended consequences is very high.
In 1985, the World Bank approved funding for what was one of the largest hydroelectric projects in the world. Constructed on the Narmada River, the project was intended to directly benefit tens of millions of people and the nation of India by harnessing the resources and power of the river. As construction began, the project became fraught with environmental and social problems, displacing over 100,000 people without compensation.
You know, it started off as a grassroots protest that then sort of swept across India, but also globally.
80,000 people in Berlin protested against the politics of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group, which had its annual meeting here in Berlin, and they were not very happy with the negative impacts that they have caused around the world.
And eventually it became controversial enough that the World Bank said that for the first time they would appoint an advisory group to look into this, called the Morse Commission, to look into the project and to decide had the World Bank behaved appropriately and responsibly in agreeing to fund this project. And the Morse Commission was a very negative report about the bank's own conduct, that it had not paid proper attention to all the social and environmental consequences of that project.
Similarly, at the global scale, you had the Earth Summit, the Rio Earth Summit in Brazil, and a call for citizens to have access to information, access to public participation, and access to justice on environmental issues.
As the bank reflected on internal shortcomings, external pressure increased, eventually gaining the attention of the United States Congress.
And it was, I think, quite newsworthy that people were coming to Washington to talk about what was happening in these distant places. Some of the early hearings brought activists from the Narmada Valley, and we had community members from Brazil and from Thailand that came at that time to speak to the Congress.
They managed to put so much political pressure on the institution, but also on the shareholders, that they, at the end, forced the bank to this reform, and they just realized that we need an eye on the ground if things like that happen, and we need to have an easy, accessible complaint mechanism.
So the inspection panel was established in 1993. It was the first of its kind.
There were many executive directors involved in the establishment of the panel, but the head of the legal department who drafted the proposal that was approved by the board, his name was Ibrahim Shihata.
And the purpose of the inspection panel was to provide an easy, accessible complaint process for people who have been negatively harmed.
We reported only to the board, so we were not part of the bank as such. So that was very difficult. Making change is never easy, and trying to change institutions is very difficult because they try to push back and resist. We were able to succeed because we had the support of the president of the World Bank, Jim Wolfenson, who had to implement the panel resolution. And he was very interested in the mechanism and gave us a lot of support.
When the inspection panel visit to the communities, then they can really understand the situation there. And the community also, they feel that, okay, so there is a way and there is a place, at least our grievances is being heard.
Kwanyo luoro ikomwa piudo tieke de luoro aduong to twal yo geno ba moto bina oro peko morate iko kwanyo luoro ikomwa tenge lobo ametie kede peko ito kede gui moru dio ko bero kede gi ber kede community di penyo wa question ta di wado duoko wado penyo gi di duoko yore memuolo mawuotin paka diro gini kodo chien.
So they can gather information from everyone who is involved and then write an independent report, investigation report.
If there are findings of noncompliance, to develop a management action plan, the package of which goes up to the board with hopefully both the findings of noncompliance, if there are some, and a plan for correcting the noncompliance and for addressing the harm of the community.
The panel reports are very well regarded. Of course, they're not always easy reading, because if you read something about something that's gone wrong, you'd rather that things go right. But it's very important material for the board. The panel members are very highly regarded.
These are people discussing together about cases, looking into documents, exchanging views on did the bank do a good job, or do we need to repair something? Is there a reason to investigate a bit deeper into something that might not have worked?
It's important to draw lessons from these reports and to do things better in future projects.
Everyone learns from it. The country teams in the given country learn from maybe what they should do differently in implementing a project. The governments learn, we learn from it here in Washington, D.C.
The board in itself has the responsibility to develop policies, to ensure that policies are passed that look into ensuring that we are able to deliver on the mandate of the bank.
People who are the most impacted, least empowered, who could largely be voiceless sometimes in their own countries, can be heard at this level in the bank.
Lobo no bero do miching jogo. Diliabu bote ngataro lolo geye. Neno mi anado jo tie di tie chungi yom nena meno esani. Dano tie di chungi yom peko moroli atie. Aloko lako koneno magege joko uro sente. So kame jo udo kede sente, jo achie kogero ude, jo achie okotwero wila piki, jo mogo otwero chwani dwegi sukulu, konyo mbukato jotuo achie me udo tie kede peko di sente li, mbukato kede jotuo, kede do kopatota toto timera becho.
Obviously, there is a positive impact of inspection panel. It helps to expose what mistakes are going on the ground, what kinds of rights are violated, and those voiceless people who have never been heard, their concerns will be exposed, right? With the work of the inspection panel brings about it, right? So that's why this will definitely brings a good hope for those people.
Atenderam em caráter imediato o nosso chamamento, né, no sentido de fazer o diálogo, fazer aqui a inspeção, né? E a gente teve diálogo bom e resolução, né, conforme a comunidade pretendia.
But the panel is also the voice of the bank, the voice of the shareholders, the voice of everyone for an accountable institution, listening to everyone and making sure that no one is harmed.
I mean, it is inevitable that everything will not always be perfect, so we do get that. And so I would call the panel the last point of defense. It is when everything else fails, that's when people come to the inspection panel, and in my view, that's how it should be.
Over the past 30 years, approximately 1.5% of bank finance projects have reached the panel for evaluation. About a third of these complaints meet the criteria to be investigated. Evaluating and investigating the issues raised in these complaints is the primary role of the panel.
The second role is really to help the World Bank to learn lessons and to change policies, to change procedures, to put in place, different systems to try to prevent the harm in the future, and to play that, oversight role to see that the institutions are complying with their existing policies.
Long-term results should be better projects, because everybody inside the bank will be looking at lessons to take from these cases and to bring them forward into other projects.
Depois da visita do painel mudou muita coisa, né? Porque eu mesmo aqui da comunidade, eu não queria sair da minha comunidade, né? E então, para muitas pessoas que ficaram aqui, uns receberam o benefício de ficar e outros de sair, né? Mas eu estou muito grata por conta de ter ficado no meu local.
The best outcomes are always when the bank's management addresses the harm issue. because the panel is not allowed to do that. The panel is only allowed to say if the bank followed its rules or not.
One of the ideas behind the panel was that the panel would find something wrong, and then everybody would be interested in fixing it, and there would be remedy for the community. But that doesn't always happen. It happens sometimes, but throughout these mechanisms, we're now focused on the fact that remedy doesn't always happen. And the reason is because the remedy has to come from the management. It has to come from the institution or the borrowers. And that disconnect has meant that sometimes communities are found to be harmed, and we have no way of enforcing or compelling that they be compensated or that they get what they deserved under their policies.
In the Savannas region of the Piauí state of Brazil, traditional communities have alleged that they are losing their lands, crops and livelihood as a result of a state project funded by the World Bank. In this instance, the panel determined that the allegations of harm were not linked to the bank finance project. Despite there being no further investigation, the community attributes significant benefit to the panel's involvement.
O painel fez com que todos escutassem. Depois do painel, a gente passou a existir no mapa. Passou a existir, que a gente era uma pessoa que não existia para o Estado, não existia para a Federação. Agora a gente existe, porque passaram a ser ouvidos. Então eles se sentem agora até mais animado para a caminhada e de fato lutar pelos seus modos de vida.
In carrying out its work, the World Bank is guided by policies designed to ensure that the benefits of its interventions do not come at the cost of harm to others. The inspection panel sheds light on the difficult issues arising in complex development projects, which in turn helps the bank achieve its mission of boosting shared prosperity on a livable planet. A mission that can only be attained with a truly independent body of oversight.
Our independence can never be taken for granted, right? It can never be taken for granted, and it can never be assured things change.
It can never be and should never be influenced by management, the board, or even the governments where these inspections and investigations are carried out.
You have to be willing to stand for the truth no matter what, and to be able to come and tell the board of the World Bank what is happening.
So their independence is sacrosanct for us to be able to ensure that there's a level of credibility that goes into their work, but also there is a level of accountability that is seen, which also speaks to integrity of our programs, but also integrity of the institution in general.